Good evening and welcome to the April 16th, 2025 meeting of the Middle School Building Committee. This meeting is being held hybrid, both in person and online. Tonight we call to order and then we go on to public comments. Is there anybody here who would like to address the board? Seeing none, I would move to approval of the minutes from March 12th, 2025. I would entertain a motion at this time.
Motion to approve.
Second.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call for a roll call vote. Marty,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Chris,
Abstain.
going around. Lynn?
Yes.
David, you're online. David?
Yes.
Anybody else there? Okay. Armand, yes. Motion passes. Moving on to correspondence, we do not have any. Moving on to new business, we'll go with the Collier's update.
All right, great, thank you very much. So we'll just start with the overall schedule. Once this is up and running. So while that's being pulled up, so as everyone knows, we're in the schematic design phase right now. We have a schematic design submission that's going to the MSBA on May 1st. That is our deadline for the submission. And then following that submission, there's going to be a review by the MSBA, and then we'll have a FAS meeting. We'll have a board meeting on June 18th. It originally was June 25th, but we received an email from the MSBA just the other day saying they want to do it a week sooner, so it's going to be on June 18th. And that'll be with kind of the same groups we've had in the past, with the design team, the OPM, and folks from the district as well. Any questions on where we are with schedule at this point?
No.
Okay.
The only question I had on schedule
Yeah.
was, we got the email from the MSBA, they were changing the dates, but that's just making it earlier in June, right?
Yeah, that's the June 18th date that we're going to be, yeah, it's a week sooner than the original date.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did receive a phone call from the MSBA. They're looking for some documents a little bit earlier to try and review some of these documents ahead of time, just because they have a shorter review window.
Okay.
So,
We're going to get to that under new business 5D on the vote
Yes.
of the board.
Yep.
Keeping that in mind, I'm just going to have an open discussion about we have a vote planned for April 29th. But I think we as a board should probably have a conversation around, would it be wise to vote maybe next week instead? Give it a week for the numbers, but let's talk about that when we get to that part of the agenda. I just want to let you know that's coming up.
great. So I think next on our agenda was to just give an update on the CM at risk. Yep, so we sent out the RFQ, which is request for qualifications, and we received 8 submissions this past Friday, Jeff, I think they came in? This past Friday. And so those submissions are up here. So they're Walsh Brothers, Shawmut, Whiting Turner Contracting, Baum Brothers, Fontaine, Consigli, DOC, which is Daniel O'Connell's, and Bar and Bar. And so that's a very good turnout for firms that are looking at this project, and they're all, reputable, great firms that are all qualified to do this project. So the process is the subcommittee is going to begin reviewing these qualifications, and from there we do a shortlist selection. And once we shortlist them, we're going to send out an RFP, which is a request for a proposal. And we'll also schedule interviews. And typically, schedule-wise, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about when we can actually get together as a group and meet to discuss the qualifications. And then the time frame between sending out an RFP and the interviews is typically around 3 weeks. So that's going to be our time frame. Once we nail down these dates with our smaller group, I'll work with Chad and make sure that all that information gets sent out to all the different contractors.
What's our target date on full committee vote?
So we We have time, so essentially, we just need
We
to...
have time, just what's the target date?
Yeah, so we're looking at, let me see if I have it in here.
And my question around that is,
Yeah.
in looking at them, there's some really good responses in some of them, especially around community engagement and getting the vote out and supporting the vote and having, one stood out to me like extra well in that area of, this is what we've already done with other districts in regards to helping them get the vote out. So for me, it's like the earlier we bring them on, potentially to help us with that, along with Colliers and JWA, it can't hurt, right?
Right.
Especially if they're a local-based firm, I think.
Right, yeah.
It speaks even more, but I
Sure.
don't want to prejudice anything out there. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I read that really, one really stuck out to me. There was 2 or 3 that all address that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, so my thought is probably the June building committee meeting, we'd be ready to have a recommendation.
Okay. That gives us,
Yeah, time to
July.
bring somebody on, and then if the committee decides to bring somebody in before the vote for that outreach piece, that gives us time to get them on board.
okay, perfect. Any other questions on that for?
And so the next slide is, and then there's a scoring sheet that we're going to be going through, and so we put this together. This can be modified. I'll wait for Marty to flip slides here.
Sorry, folks.
No, you're okay.
All set.
This is an example. These are ones that I put together just for now, again, by the committee. If there's something more specific we want to ask, we can certainly change some of these or add a question or so on. But basically what we're looking at is what strategies do you bring to the pre-con to ensure the GMP meets the budget? Strategies during the pre-con to set up the construction process to meet the project schedule. Strategies during the pre-con to set up the complex owner-occupied building construction scope and make sure it goes as smooth as possible. What are some specific project risks, challenges that you see? Referencing strategies utilized on other similar projects. And then we want to talk about their phasing and logistics, their team experience with construction on occupied schools. And then we want to talk about their experience with the geothermal system experience, advantages and challenges that they've seen, and then their closeout process with the district. So this is an example of what we'll want to get from these qualifications and then through the interviews as well. Any questions on the process?
What's our timeline for going through this qualification review process?
Yeah, so we're gonna set up dates, but we probably have a couple weeks to look through that and then shortlist, send out the RFP, and then it's 3 weeks from there before we want to have interviews.
Okay, so a couple weeks to get the short list.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
Any questions?
Can you remind me who's on that subcommittee?
It's
Me, Dave, and Chris.
Okay, just making sure I'm not on
Yeah.
it.
Do you want to be on it?
No.
Okay, just making sure, Larry.
Thank you.
And then Colliers and
Did I
Data
say
Provider
me?
on it as well.
Marty's
Did you
Lynn.
decide?
Lynn, Chris, and David.
What's that?
Please don't say me.
Okay. I don't need an answer right now, but.
I'm just curious, those, you were saying that the evaluation categories and comments here, are these are examples or? has it-
Yeah.
And the committee will get together and decide?
Yes. But these are something I put together just, I thought were, high-level questions, but if we want to get more specific on any topic, we certainly can.
All right, moving on to new business, B, cost estimate reconciliation overview. I'm gonna guess this is our friends from JWA.
Sure, and Alan interject
Yeah, well,
when
yeah, you can start off. and
as
then we'll-
necessary, but we had a really successful cost estimate reconciliation on April 7th. A few folks from the committee were able to join, which was great, but basically a day spent with the estimators, and it's kind of interesting coming with the summary table is really by the end of many hours of discussion, they just swapped numbers. So for the PSR, again, that was just estimated on a per square foot cost from similar projects in the state. We were just relying on one cost estimator at the time, that was the designer cost estimator, PM&C. And so once we submitted all of our schematic design documentation to them, they came back with numbers. PM&C came in at about 120 million, and AM Fogarty came in at about 119 million. So great that they were already pretty close together. And then during the reconciliation, again, a lot of discussion on, what they were carrying for site and quantity of windows and, all of the details, which was really helpful. But they came to, PM&C went down to 119 and AM Fogarty went up to 120. What's a little bit interesting here is that, so for the MSBA submission is the quote-unquote reconciled number that we submit with Collier. So again, at PSR, we are at 116.8, just kind of taking a round number from that estimate. Here, you'll notice that the reconciled number is actually less than the two numbers coming from the estimators. And that's because there was a lot of discussion about tariffs during the reconciliation. And it was interesting to see how the estimators themselves felt about it. They kind of had different opinions on whether they could even place a number on tariffs when so much is unknown at this point. And as we've seen since the 7th, it's changed quite considerably since then. So they both included, a tariff allowance, quote unquote, for $1 million in their cost estimates. And in working with Colliers, we decided it made a lot more sense to put that $1 million in contingency and take it out of the construction costs. So that's why that 118 number is lower than the average of the two construction cost estimates. Down in blue, we have the project cost over time. So green is construction costs, blue is project costs. And so again, at PSR, we had a rough multiplier that we were applying to the construction cost to get from the 116.8 to what we thought would be a project cost of around 151.8 for all of the project costs, including fees and soft costs and furniture. After the reconciliation, that's come in at 151,529.
Christian, just got a question on the tariffs, putting that into the contingency.
Yeah.
Is that based on 10% roughly?
It was based on, yeah.
So what they were looking at, currently right now what the tariff on steel is, so a 25% increase on steel, anything coming from, overseas, and so our windows are coming overseas and that type of stuff. So they were getting a rough estimate on what those tariffs would consider, and then kind of, bumping it up to $1 million based on just other miscellaneous costs.
Okay. I just asked because I don't know how much our materials, I go with that, but it seems, $1 million seems low to me.
Yeah.
We asked that same question during that reconciliation meeting, and it was, I guess, eye-opening for me that what they did was said, like he was just talking about, X% of the job needs this much steel. We know how much the steel costs, and then based upon most of the steel's going to, they said Canada, I think was in the meeting, based upon what the tariffs are in Canada and what the cost is today, even if we added in the X% tariff that we're expecting, that would take care of, I think it was like 429 or right about 400 to 500,000, and then the rest was baking in for the intangibles of the rest of the project. So it was a pretty, at least half of it seemed to me to be pretty spot on about how they were estimating, and the less of just like, hey, we're gonna just add 10% to the whole thing.
No, yeah, I get that. I was just, I was thinking of the windows. I know if we want to do the center school windows, it's 300 grand or something. If those were all got a 10% tariff, that's 30 grand right there.
Yep.
And if it is 10%, which I know they're not doing, but that would only be $10 million worth of materials, which doesn't seem to make sense to me. But I'm just a layman, so I trust that they have thought about this more than I have.
Yeah, they said every project, that's what, lately that's the question they're getting asked, and that's how they're factoring that.
Okay.
Well, and that was their other answer too, is like MSBA for now, that's what everybody else was putting in as a placeholder, right? Like it wasn't like we are the only ones putting that placeholder. It seems to be a pretty across the board placeholder for now.
And it's also a chicken and egg issue. Like you could aim higher and pad yourself even more, but to what degree are you, you then have to go explain to the community that you're asking to bond for this money that you actually don't have any verifiable evidence that you're going to need. So, and that could politically make it challenging for you as well. So you want to do something, but you want to be careful to not overstate what is a really quickly shifting terrain, you know. And we still have a year of design to continually revisit a lot of these issues. So even that question of German windows, it's not like what we have in this estimate is what we're actually going to be working with. We still have a lot of room for revision of our thinking.
Okay,
Hopefully, things will stabilize.
right.
Canada and Mexico are protected. Right, Canada and Mexico are protected, though. We have an agreement with them,
Right.
a trade agreement that's kind of unchanging with them right now. So we actually just had a similar presentation from someone for my company, and they said we should carry about three quarters of a percent. So this number is like 0.84, so a little higher than that. So it seems pretty consistent with the data that my company was given on Monday this week. So. Adam, what about like escalation? What do you hear for escalation in that number?
We've got it coming up in
Okay.
just a second. So just broad brush strokes, construction costs increase approximately 2 million, and construction costs increased 2 million, whereas project costs decreased 300,000. And so looking at why construction costs increased, and I'm skipping ahead to the kind of the bullet in blue, is that we were actually surprised that they didn't increase more with the amount that we put into the project. A big change was the decision to proceed with construction manager at risk, which comes with a premium. A turf field was added since PSR. Left turn lane off Williams and off-site sidewalk improvements were added. And then, of course, the SD costs are now based on the documents instead of comparable projects. So it was interesting to hear from the cost estimers that they did feel that the bidding environment has improved since we submitted the PSR submission. And so some of the numbers that they were quoting had actually come down, and that's the first time in a number of years that they've seen that. And then on the project cost side, really we were going with a very rough multiplier at PSR with 1.3. And I think Adam has passed out the spreadsheet that's called the 3011. It's an incredibly complicated spreadsheet that the MSBA uses to figure out reimbursement rates. But plugging in all those numbers, then you're actually able to generate that true project cost. And so that's why that number has actually come down a little bit. A little bit on the discussion.
Can we go back for a second?
Yeah, of course.
So I think the real, for me, and just my personal view, I'm looking at the why did costs increase? And one was, I think we need to be, as a committee, able to explain where those increase came from. I mean, they're there, but I think we need to say, you know, the construction manager at risk, sure, was a premium, but we did it to save costs on the project going forward. We did it to engage somebody earlier so we can submit the bid packages as soon as the vote goes through. Make sure we're all able to articulate what that premium is getting us. Because it's not just a premium. Like the turf field, it's not just a premium. The turf field it's one field at the school now.
Right.
If we don't, you can't rotate that field. It's going to be mud after you spend $800,000 to put grass. And then you're not going to have a field. You're just going to have dirt. And that would just be $800,000 wasted. So and then the other thing is, we've had a lot of people come to us about traffic, right? And their concerns about traffic. The school plan in itself probably takes care of 90% of that flow by adding the long snake. But we've listened to the public, and we have a plan to further alleviate the traffic on William Street as well, above and beyond what may be needed in the plan, and then plus the sidewalk improvement. So I just want to make sure, like, if somebody wants to push back on me and say, Armin, no, but I just think we all just need to be able to say these are the reasons why those things were chosen, and we still came in below the PSR.
Right.
Marty?
And I spot on 100%, and I'd add to it that, the turf field, it really can be seen as almost an investment in the other fields that exist in town, you know, to the extent that a turf field can take the pressure off some of the existing grass fields, it's a critical investment, I think. And then, as I understand the construction manager at risk process, and tell me if I'm not framing this correctly, is that it has the potential to have a construction process that's more responsive to the neighborhood issues that we've heard about, basically.
Oh,
you know.
absolutely, yeah. So a CM at risk is definitely more involved in the process. You know, they'll come to the committee meetings with us, they'll have representatives from whatever contractor we go with, where, you know, typically, you know, if you do a hard bid, you don't get that service. They'll be willing to come on early, like we talked about earlier, and help with that community outreach. There's just a lot more involvement from CM than there is going hard bid.
Any other further? And those questions came up last week that we got from people in the crowd too, so I think that's good.
Yeah. So just wanted to cover briefly a little bit on what some decisions made during the reconciliation. Again, most of it was on expectations on material costs, comparing quantities. We did have our consultants join the team, so you know, we had a section on mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then a section on the site, a section on structural. So helpful to get their input. At the end of the day, we did decide to make a few value engineering efforts. We had an exterior bench allowance that we cut by 30%. We had a planting allowance that we cut by 20%. And we had what seemed to us to be a fairly expensive line item for bike shelter. And so we cut those three to help bring down the site costs in particular. Again, that's a portion of the project that will be borne by the district and the town. Not, you know, the MSBA will only contribute so much, so it's helpful to look at site aspects in particular when you're going through a VE process. On the flip side, we did look at, you know, we have kind of an extra thick membrane roof with a slightly longer roof warranty as well. And so we, you know, asked the cost estimators about that price difference, but decided that that was not worth electing for value engineering. We looked at the cost of epoxy terrazzo versus porcelain ceramic tile. That's in a lot of the common spaces on the first floor, even going into the cafeteria. That one was pretty interesting because we have a fairly substantial amount of terrazzo, and they said once you get that square footage, then the dollars per square foot actually come down considerably, and so it wasn't that much of a savings to go to the porcelain ceramic tile, and certainly an improvement in long-term maintenance. And so again, that was elected to keep that into the project. Air source heat pump, in lieu of geothermal, we wanted to get those costs to look at the payback over time, and we'll go through that actually in a little bit after we go through our MSBA schematic design submission. And then we also looked at a few different window types. I think we gave the estimators 3 different window types, and getting those prices back, again, we saw that the difference in cost was not substantial enough to warrant making a change there.
And remember when we talked with the energy modeling, when we looked at the difference in quality, you had operational cost differences, so it wasn't worth taking the lesser insulating or quality window and having greater maintenance or energy loss. So it kind of bore out that study well. So.
And like I said, from the conversations we were having, we kept going back to maintenance and long-term maintenance of the issues. So like the 80 mil membrane roof versus 60 mil, which I know nothing about, except for what they were talking to us on the call. But when you're talking a 30-year warranty versus a 40-year warranty, or 20 versus 30, sorry. From a maintenance perspective, we're not going to have somebody, you know, keep going up there to fix it like we do with some of our shorter term roofs. So it made more sense to bag better material on that up front. On the air source heat pumps, again, maintenance. The long term, this isn't a go in and fix it in 10 years issue. This is like, okay, a pump may go out in the future, but if one pump goes out, you still have the other pump, or the way I understand it is the other pump takes over.
Yeah, it doesn't shut down the entire system.
Right, it
So
doesn't
you're not,
shut
your
down.
building isn't down, there's maybe a specific room that is down, but
Right.
you can still function the rest of the building.
And then on the value engineering, like the planning allowance, like we were like, let's go back to maintenance. We want this as low maintenance as possible, so these non-shade or screening features are not as important to us as making sure we have screening features for the surrounding neighborhood to have versus the no perennials. So it was a pretty interesting full day of conversation on Monday, which led to a very shorter than expected Tuesday, which was fun.
Which is great.
It was good that, I mean, the fact that they came in so close together, the fact that we had as much time as we did because we were organized to have good conversations, just kept it all moving. I wanted to address the lead point comment there on the bike shelter because it seems like a lot of money on on the bike shelters. So the district does have a lot of people riding their bikes here. To get one of our many lead point requirements, we have a sort of flexible system. One of our goals was to get an extra point based on how many students were riding bikes, but that required that half of the bike racks be covered. And that half was a large number because of the number of estimated bike riders. So that ended up being a significant, and we had 3 different locations. So we had 3 different shelters, and they were quite high quality, all just for one lead point. So that seemed like an awful lot of money. We have other ways of achieving our lead requirements separate from that. So it's not a big deal that we chose to go away from that. It just didn't seem like where the district's priorities were in terms of spending money on the project. So that's why that happened. On the plantings, I wanted to just say also that that's one that we often look at because plantings occur late in the game. And if we have contingency at the end, it's also possible to bring back plantings. Not that we are in any way short of plantings. We often start sort of, the number is usually pretty healthy, but it's also a number you can easily recover later on because there's often that opportunity at the end. So site tends to be the one that we look to first for a lot of these kinds of conversations when we have VE.
And I think a really important thing to point out about the bike shelters is we're not trying to discourage kids from
No.
riding to school. We are trying to encourage them to get the cars off of the roads in town. What it came down to is we're still having the same amount of bike racks, correct?
Correct.
They're just not covered. So basically their bike won't get wet during the rain, but most kids aren't going to ride their bike in the rain. So that was the thing there. So there will still be ample number of bike racks to encourage children to ride their bikes to school. This does not change that whatsoever.
We just wanted to show the cover pages of the estimates and where you have PM&Cs on the left and AM Fogarty's on the right, and you can see they kind of divide things out a little bit differently, but they, are trying to itemize out. So the new school is, that's 50 pages of information condensed into that line item. Site work, demolition. There's a design and pricing contingency included in this cost estimate, and that's them acknowledging that we're in schematic design, that there's a lot of details that have yet to be worked out. As we develop those details, they'll be able to put cost to those details, and then that design and pricing contingency percentage will get reduced each time we go through this process. Chris, you're asking about escalation, and so that's for up to the bid, what they expect in fall of 2026. One carried 6.38%, and the other carried 6.5%. How does that line up compared to with what you guys are seeing?
Yeah, I think we're doing like 5% a year, so it's close.
Yeah.
A little light, but it's close.
Yeah. And then you can kind of see below the line, general conditions, insurance, bonds, builder's risk, CM contingency, CM fees. So again, those are all things that will get wrapped into the construction costs, but that final number at the bottom is the one that you'll kind of expect to see for all the construction costs included. So again, on PM&Cs, it was 118 before the $1 million in tariffs, and over on the other side, it was 119 million before the $1 million in tariffs. You'll see at the bottom there, AM Fogarty did start we did carry a few alternates, and I think Marty on the next page is the reconciled version of that. Yeah, so 3, we kept it pretty simple, but these were numbers that we just wanted to have the cost estimators price out so that we could get this information back to you all. And so, you know, an interesting process in that we know that the district's considering potentially having PV on the roof in the future, maybe as part of the project. Right now, it is not included in the project costs, but if we were to add a 500 kilowatt PV system to the roof, the estimators were thinking that will come in about 1.6 million. We thought it would be interesting just to keep track of the cost for those off-site traffic improvements, just so we can put a number to that. That's coming in at 1.48. And then also just to understand the difference between a turf field versus a sod field. And like you said, Armin, maybe not a very successful sod field, but that savings would be $816,000. Any questions on those?
In the total project costs that we're going to see later, the infrastructure for the PV roof is included. Is that
Correct, yeah. It's a code requirement that we have a PV-ready roof. We've gone a little bit above and beyond the percentage that's required, but yeah, so both structurally and in terms of future closet space for all of the electrical equipment, and then the conduits running between the two is all included.
Go ahead.
It might be too early for this, but do we have any idea what the building use, electrical use would be, and what that 500 kW system represents?
I was afraid you were going to ask that, so I was trying to scroll back in my notes here to see if I can. We can have them take that number, because I'm afraid I would make a mistake. I do have some general electrical use information in that energy report that we sent around. But I think to be sure that we're actually getting at how a 500 kilowatt system actually provides and meets that, because of how that energy is stored and supplied, I'd want to have them answer.
Sure.
But in that report, you'll see the total energy use of the proposed system is 1,535,544 kilowatts. Yeah, so we do have the data, and we can ask them to give us a little bit more information. So the question you're really trying to get at is, how close would we be to net
Yeah.
zero if we, it would certainly offset a significant amount of the electrical use. Whether it's going to achieve net zero on its own with just the roof, I bet it's going to fall short based on other projects that we've looked at. But it would certainly help, your annual operating costs significantly.
Mhm.
And we can give a little bit more accurate information if we give this number to Ellen and have them crunch that for us. So that'll take care of it.
Thanks.
I think the other thing on that one, right, is that the code requires us to put the infrastructure in place. The anticipation is that we're going to be receiving credits back from Eversource from the geothermal project that could be used by the future
Right.
select board to then put the panels on it. So it would pay, the rebates from Eversource from the project would then go towards the panels if the select board at that time chose to do so.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that, we're already spending a lot of money here. It's scary to do that, and add that on. But if we've talked about this with other places in town, DPW, or if we have a future site down by the meadows, but if we could do a bulk buy, the more you buy at one time, the better. So that might be something to think about down the road.
Okay, is that the end of the reconciliation?
No, one more.
Larry?
It's okay. So this is my attempt at a summary of that very complicated spreadsheet, which really kind of can be grouped into these kind of separate line items. So again, the construction budget of about 118.8 million. Soft costs that we say, that's the OPM, architect, engineering, CM, all of our fees included, FF&E, and miscellaneous project costs, so that includes, moving expenses, et cetera, comes to about 21.5 million. And then there's contingencies, which on the 3011 are kind of at the bottom of that spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's on the second page.
Owners and construction, that comes into about 11.1. So that's how we get to the total project budget of 151.5. Down there, we have also included, and this is just an estimate, and I need to say that again and again because we have yet to meet with the MSBA. So what makes this spreadsheet so complicated is that we're also including what square footage from each category the MSBA is not participating in. And then they claw back a little bit of our fee based off of that square footage and the OPM fee, and it feeds into this very complicated. So that's why it's really hard to tell folks what the project cost is going to be until you go through this process. But right now, that MSBA maximum total grant is 55.9 million, leaving an anticipated district share of 95.5 million.
So then the question goes to Ian.
Yes. So.
You know my question, right, Ian?
Yes. Your question is, what is the impact to residents? What is
Yes.
the town going to, what is the local share of funding? So if we assume $151 million total project costs, and we've been talking today, Adam and I, Adam shared with myself that we have seen in the past with the projects that they've worked on or they've seen between 95 and 100% reimbursement rate from the MSBA. So that puts us in a good position starting off. Now, I'd like to note that the actual reimbursement, the MSBA reimbursement rate is based on the hard costs. The soft costs are excluded from this calculation. So really it's somewhere between, call it 30 to 35%, 36% as an actual. So if we look at the local share funding, if in this example we use the maximum total grant of the 100%, so the 55 million, we'd be looking at a local share of about 95.5 million. Now, I spoke to you before. There's a couple of caveats here. One, the interest rate. That's a big part of our number. So I looked at some comparable bond offerings in the past month with similar terms and have ratings of either AA plus, which is what we have as a current rating, or AAA, as they are the most comparable. There were 3 bond offerings that were the closest. Unfortunately, there were none that were doing 30 years, but each of the 3 were doing 25 years. And they had a total interest cost on an average basis of about 3.64%. So as a step below, Long Meadow is at AA plus. I thought that a 4% interest rate would be reasonable. At a 4% interest rate, at a $95.5 million local share, on a 30-year term, we would be looking at about $5.4 million as an annual debt service, which would be about $1.80 on the tax rate, and at an average single home valuation of about $502,000, that's about somewhere in the range of $900. Now, granted, this is a range because we could get less in reimbursement, so this could push us closer to the $1,000 per home impact in the tax bill, and we also are subject to a lot of factors here. We don't know what the interest cost is going to be. We could borrow at 40 years. If the Municipal Empowerment Act passes without modification, school districts are allowed to borrow at a 40-year term. That would push down our annual debt service, which would lower the total tax bill that residents face. These are all different factors that play into this, so at the current moment, that can be a rough guess of where we would be.
That's awesome. That's good work. Thanks. Anybody have a question? Yeah, Josh.
I unfortunately decided to learn about the bond market this year. With rising yields, how does that affect a 30-year municipal bond?
So that's a great question. Because Congress is currently looking at removing the tax-exempt status of municipal bonds, it could cause interest rates on municipal bonds to rise significantly, which would affect our borrowing costs. So in the near term, depending on many different factors, one, if the project goes forward, and 2, when we go out for bond, I'm already in discussions with our financial advisor, so she's aware that this is coming down the pipeline. So we're looking at what this would be in terms of time frame, because that's the most important thing right now, is when we go out for borrowing. But to answer your question, we could see interest rates rise in the coming years. So that is something to consider.
Go ahead, Nicole.
It's fine. I was just was curious, at what point would this information feel solid enough to add to, say, the FAQ on our website?
Sure.
Or start putting
So this is something Lynn and I was talking about, where we would like to build a website link that a resident would be able to put in their tax bill and effectively see what their impact would be on their own individual level. This is something that we're starting to build out, and this will take some time, but hopefully this will give residents a much better picture of where their impact will be versus a general answer.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah,
That
that'd
sounds
be great.
great.
Then we can incorporate that
Yeah,
right into
exactly.
that page. And-
Perfect.
yeah.
Minimally, you'd want to wait until the MSBA, you had an
Yes.
agreement with the MSBA on what the grant is.
Yeah, we want to go ahead from the MSBA, from the SD submission, before we do anything else.
And the date again of that meeting, of the MSBA board meeting is
The
Got
18th.
moved to-
Yeah, the 18th.
18.
I think we would know before then, Marty. We're gonna have some but I don't know how much before then.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah, my only other question would be is, I mean, this has been a long time, right? The planning for this, and I know one of the things we talked about was there was debt exclusions that were being paid off along the way that made sure the time to do that. Do you have any insight into that? Like, as we go to the public to make sure they understand that we knew that there was going to be a cost to building the school, but we also knew that it was going to be offset by other projects coming off the rolls.
Sure, so I can't speak to the specific numbers about what's coming off the rolls,
Okay.
but with prior planning, it was determined that between fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, there was enough debt falling off of our debt service that this would be the perfect time for us to go out for a large borrowing, and that is still the case.
Yes.
So when you say the numbers before of roughly $900, et cetera, would that be including that debt having come off and lowering people's original tax bill?
Yes.
And then this would still bring it up approximately 900? Okay.
A range of
A
between
range,
900
yes,
to 1,000.
depending on home value.
Any other
That's,
questions?
that's the net. Can I go back to that question? In other words, if no borrowing came off the rolls, it would be up, this would cause
I did not calculate if it would be not taken off the debt roll. I did it based on the fact of where we would be in 27 with the debt service falling off.
Gotcha, okay.
Any other questions?
That's it for kind of the money side.
Okay.
Are you okay on the money side? Okay.
Are we moving on to the submission, or are you still on this?
Yeah, moving on to the submission would be great. So next slide, Marty, this is our table of contents for our schematic design binder going in. I will not go through each of these line items for you, but the big ones are that we're submitting at the number 1 there, a submittal to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, and that's really focused on our special education summary and allocation of spaces. And again, that square footage is not really handled by the MSBA, but is more handled by DESE. I think, we should be in fine shape, but that's just an extra little layer to it. The MSBA wants to make sure that they have DESE's approval before that MSBA board approval. And then in the rest of the binder is really kind of what we've been filling you in on since we've started the project. So everything from room data sheets, which will include, rough outlines of what we have for furniture in each room, to our lead scorecard, as Dory was mentioning, a number of points that we're going for. We'll have narratives from all of our consultants, in there for the structural systems and plumbing and mechanical systems. We'll have some outline specifications that start going into, kind of the level of products that we're expecting in the school. Our schematic design drawings will be included. And then tonight, we wanted to go into a little bit more detail on the life cycle cost analysis, which will be part of the submission. And we have some preliminary data back from our traffic engineer. And we'll have his full report in time for this submission, but we wanted to get you, kind of some early information back from him as soon as we could.
So I'll pick up here just to talk a little bit about that. So remember, Greg came and spoke about the energy modeling that we were doing. And that was important because it allowed us to go into the cost reconciliation with specifications and alternative specifications for things like windows, for things like our insulation package. So we first worked with the energy modeler to try and optimize for performance so that we get the best performance we could, but also we wanted to understand the cost impact. And as I said, the window study really did not merit reducing the quality based on the outcome and the cost. And we did find that we could reduce the insulation under the slab, and that was a savings to the project, so we did make that change to the project. All of that's incorporated in the specifications, so the estimate represents the specifications that we determined were appropriate to the project. What Greg said he was waiting on is to get the information from the cost estimators as to the cost of the alternative system, the air source heat pump system, and get the final cost on the ground source heat pump system. So they did a lot of modeling work to try and also optimize the building's heating and cooling load so they could reduce the number of boreholes. And that did happen between PSR and SD, and that then allowed us to get a better number on the geothermal system cost. And then based on the package they provided, we got a revised number on the air source heat pump system. So Greg's modeling continued, and we had you all get a copy of the 75-page report on all of that. And I know nobody's going to want to dig in, but I know a few people are super interested, so I wanted you to have that. But what it all boils down to is really this information as a comparison between the two systems. And it is what we stated, but with more specific detail, that you're essentially, the important thing to note is the initial cost of the geothermal heat pump system is $80,000 more than an air source heat pump system. That's a lot less than we initially thought it would be in terms of the difference, partly because we optimized the geothermal. So that's not a huge difference, but it's a difference. But when you look at the payback of that over a 30-year cycle, when you add together the lower annual maintenance costs, the lower replacement costs of parts, even factoring in inflation, and then the operational cost because you're actually, it's a more energy efficient system, you end up with a 30-year payback and a difference of value between the two systems of over $2 million. So $80,000 upfront, $2 million at the end of 30 years is definitely the right way to go. And Greg was sure it was going to be that way, but we actually had to go through a lot of work to get all the detail in. And he worked closely actually with utility to track their information in terms of projected electricity costs and made sure that was factored into both systems as well. So some reassurance here that that was a good choice that we made and we'll stick with. And as Armin was saying, part of why we wanted to go for that system is because Mass Save incentivizes it heavily. We get a much larger bonus at the end of the project for having gone with geothermal. And again, our energy modeling has us on track for a below 25. It's actually at about 20 EUI, energy use intensity per square foot. That also comes with a bonus at the end of the project if we are able to achieve that and then can demonstrate successful building testing at that level as well.
So worth noting that the end of project incentives, the end of project credits that we potentially could receive were not factored into what Ian was describing earlier.
Correct.
So
Correct.
to the extent that we can secure those end of project credits, it would reduce the obligation of the town at the end of the project.
Correct.
Here we go.
Great.
All right.
So, Dory went out of her comfort zone to talk about energy, and I'll go out of my comfort zone and talk about traffic. Greg unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and I'll do the best I can, but, and again, these are preliminary findings. The full report will, of course, be included in the SD binder, but they collected data both in April of 2024 and March of 2025, did some field visits also in March of 2025. The way that they do their report, they're predicting out to 2028 for the horizon year, looking at both the opening year, but that also applies, they're looking at growth in traffic throughout the town till 2028. So when the results are not just representative of the school changing, but also just of what is anticipated for additional traffic within Longmeadow in general. They adjusted traffic volumes upwards to account for Glenbrook walkers. So it's not just taking the trips to Glenbrook and applying those to Williams, but actually increasing that load a little bit. And then also increased it pretty substantially for inclement weather days. Next page, Marty. So in their report, they start with number 4, but I'll start with number 1. So they looked at specific intersections. They gathered data for basically almost all of the major intersections that you see on this map. At Williams and Laurel, that does degrade a level of service during weekday morning peak. Overall, throughout the day, it still operates at a level of service D, which means stable traffic flow. At Bliss and Woolworth and Oakwood, it degrades from a level of service E, which is its current level, to an F at peak hours. And we asked Greg about that a little bit before he had to jump to another meeting. He said that was actually mostly cars coming from the roads to the north, so Oakwood, folks trying to turn out onto Bliss. And he, again, said a lot of that had to do with just the anticipated traffic increases in Longmeadow in general. Bliss Road at Blockland, Burbank, similar condition there, degrading from a D to an E. And same thing, that it was mostly coming from the Burbank side up on the north there. And that was helpful to understand that from a D to an E represents an increase in a delay of 5 to 11 seconds. So not huge, but substantive. And then the big news was that all of the other intersections within the study continue to operate at the same level of service that they have today.
All other intersections that were studied, and that they cast a pretty wide net on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the reclassifications that you're describing to go from E to F or from D to E, that's when, in 2028, if we were to open a new middle school. That's the projected change in classification of those intersections.
Right, exactly. Okay. Next slide has a little bit more about the site itself. And basically their recommendations, which was the part that we were quite interested in hearing about. So on the East Drive, they're recommending providing a single entering lane and a dedicated left and right turn lane exiting. And so that, interesting to hear in terms of, that's kind of how we thought that eastern driveway would be formatted, but interesting to get that feedback. On the west driveway, it's just providing access to the loading dock and serving as a secondary exit for bus and passenger car traffic. So no car entry at that point. They did confirm that we have drop-off areas for approximately 120 vehicles, and that should more than accommodate the expected queuing that they're seeing at both pickup and drop-off. And so with all of those,
So we've got, so per that study I saw before, it was like 30 peak and 25 peak at both schools, like 55 cars would be peak if that traffic
Just
was
add those together.
and even if we added another 30%, we're still well below the 120.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And so what's interesting is that there are not any queuing concerns at Williams with the fact that we have those driveways with those options and that amount of queuing that can go on site. But he did recommend and think that it's warranted. It will ease eastbound traffic. And so they are recommending that we include that left turn lane on Williams, and that was accommodated in the cost estimates. The other thing that was accommodated in the cost estimates was number 5, which was interesting, was they're recommending a sidewalk on the south side of Williams between Ridge and Heather, and that they recommend a crosswalk and a beacon across Williams at that Heather Street intersection. So there is a sidewalk on the south side of Williams all the way to Ridge now, coming from the high school. And so they're just recommending extending it that far and then crossing Williams at that point.
That left turn lane, how many cars could queue in that left turn lane? Do we
That's a
know that
good
number?
question, Marty. I think when they first had that kind of early schematic, I think it was 4 or 5. Any questions on the traffic side of things? Great. So the rest of the presentation is really just the pretty pictures that we brought with us to the community meeting that we had at Williams, which was a super successful event, I thought, and great. We had kind of tables spread around, and folks could kind of go to whichever table drew their attention. It was a nice way of dissipating some of the negative comments, but also making sure that we could address people's questions and comments. And we had some of our consultants there, and a lot of the building committee was there, and it was, yeah, that was great.
I actually did have a question, if we could step back on the traffic.
Yeah.
What are we anticipating, the next slide is actually better for my question. I got some questions on Woolworth.
Yeah.
What are we anticipating? Because right now, people queue there or just drop off their kids, and we have heard about that a bit. But is the anticipation that Woolworth people can drive through and come all the way across and join in the queue there? If
Yes.
that's- okay.
Exactly. And I think they're, in the traffic modeling, it sounds like they're kind of expecting those loads to stay the same as they are now, that folks coming from the north are going to Williams now. And so most of the added traffic burden is on the Williams side of the site. But that is very helpful to have that access from Woolworth as well.
Yeah.
8 on the left there, is that staff parking? I think that's what you said before. No.
Well,
Visitor and staff.
visitor and some staff, and then the majority of staff would be on the right side
Okay.
of the,
Great.
which is north. We've rotated it.
If cars did come in through Woolworth and join the drop-off lane, they would have to exit through Williams, or is there a way to cycle back and exit through Woolworth again?
It's a great
Or are
question.
we
I
really
think
trying
that
to
they
set
could
this up to
still-
discourage exiting through
They
that?
could still rotate through after,
Good turn
you know, if they,
end of the parking.
because they're also anticipating some amount of student drop-off here.
Yeah.
So it's both this area and this area. And so if you came in from Woolworth and dropped off here, you could circle back out.
So cars coming in from Williams will follow that line just for a minute, yep,
Come down.
and cycle around, so they'd need to get back into the car.
Right.
They'd need to get back into the line in order to do that. And so what would be, where they're both meeting at that back part?
Right.
Yep, how do we anticipate that working?
It's a great question. I mean, I think we'll get there in terms of, you know, is there a stop sign on which side, both sides?
Is it like
It is
LHS
running
where they
one
alternate
way.
just naturally when you go into LHS, there's like a
Yeah.
courtesy of like, you just switch off and on as you go.
At that point, you are running one way in though, so, you have 2 lanes and it's a
Yeah.
wide area, so, and it would be worse if there was a 2-way traffic there.
Yeah.
So,
And could
Okay.
it turn into like us actually saying like right turn only out of the loop, like where they have, forcing
Yeah.
them to Williams, like
Yeah.
depending on what that looks like, right? We could always change that if we had to with
Right.
a sign.
Yeah, and that happens a lot.
Right,
A lot of projects around, once you're actually physically
Or
living it.
experiencing it,
Yes,
yeah.
you switch things around.
right, right.
Yeah.
This is one way.
The benefit is that there's a lot of different loops that you can do,
Yeah.
and so I think, as Adam said, yeah,
Once
it's
we
often,
There's a lot more options than we had.
see how it
with the high
goes,
school
and there's a lot of
generation.
options, and there's a lot of separation, so that's the important part, right? Buses are separate, parking's separate, it's not all just in one.
Cars that are exiting the campus onto Williams, are they only able to exit via the east driveway, or would they be able to exit, they'd have to drive down that bus lane or through the parking lot? So I think the answer is no to that.
I-
They're only exiting?
I think they probably could exit the west, but I think it would be discouraged. And so is that with some amount of speed bumps through the parking area or something like that? But I would imagine that it's really just those people parking in the staff and visitor parking in front that are exiting on the west side of the site. And buses.
Again, it's like, some of these things, as Adam was saying, you find, you may explore and, decide that it flows better for everybody going right
Right.
to be
If-
flowing that way and everybody left going the other way, just to reduce backup, or it's a little, some of these things are gonna
Right. I wonder
be
if
adjustable.
to create the flexibility you described, to permit potentially cars to exit from the east driveway and the west driveway on Williams, do you create a loop so that they can in fact go down that bus lane as well? Right now, that would not be a natural turn.
We're saying everybody has to go right on Williams right now, right? That
Yeah.
was-
I thought so.
Yeah. Nobody can go left on Williams.
Nobody's going.
No, they have a left.
said
right
they
and a
coming
left
out of
lane,
the
right?
school.
Out of the
Coming
school.
out? I thought
Yeah.
you said it was only right only.
There's a right and a left turn lane. So that'll be 3 lanes wide coming into the school.
Into the school.
1 to come in and
Right.
2 to come out.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead,
Um,
Two to come out.
Sorry, do you have-
No, go ahead.
So how will it work if cars are, it's probably easier if I point this out. If cars are queued up here and someone wants to pull into this lot or a bus wants to get in, it's gonna jam up traffic?
Mhm.
Time of flow matters too, so that's one of the things that we've been talking to the district a little bit about, is looking at when the bus is arriving and when the cars are arriving and when that flow happens. And, in previous projects, we've in DD done a little bit more study of the on-site timing systems and flow, and made further adjustments based on scheduling, because that is, and where you're dropping off, where students are getting out, and how long you expect it to take to empty the buses and empty cars, so that you can kind of play out some of that. But yeah, I think that's kind of why I can envision the possibility that you actually want to stream your right turn that way, so that you actually have that relief for the left turn in.
And the other variables, who can park in that
Yeah,
southern lot?
Right.
That would influence who's trying to get in there
Mhm.
at various times.
Yeah.
I mean, the design, I think, for me, gives us a lot of options we don't have today.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we can get in, we can get into loops and no left-hand turns and no right-hand turns and adjust. Like, the design, I think, is great because it gives us those options that there aren't today, right? Like, I had to drive my truck on the curb in the grass last week to get to the thing because all the people were parked there for lacrosse practice. But
And there is some programming discussions that really kind of have to happen internally about this, that we've broached, but there'll be more, I think, once it's a real project.
Hold on.
There's a lot of.
This Nicole had her hand up for a long time before that, Nicole, then you're next.
Okay, thank you.
I was just curious, so the loops that are near the field, et cetera, that like curve that runs closest to the field and where the building is, are those wide enough for cars to pass each other so that as we settle in and our administrative team is able to get a feel for what things look like at the end of the day, because I know at the end of the day, it feels like that's when things really start to bunch up, when someone is ready to pick up a child who it turns out is not ready to leave yet. Will they have room to come up with some systems that allow for people to be pulled over in one place while waiting, while other cars go around? There's room for 2 cars.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my question about the bus loop. Is it wide enough potentially for 2 lanes there?
Like I like where the high school in front of the pool has the, like the dip in, where it feels like that's where
Right.
people wait. like,
Yeah.
to your
And you,
point.
Yeah.
you can see
See, I would
it.
hope that there is no passing lane. Like, I don't want no
I
passing
don't
lane.
super want that, but also I'm thinking you might get stuck there otherwise if somebody's pulled in there and blocking the line and waiting for their
Oh, you mean
child.
just for one car to be parked?
Yeah.
Like, like we're all in one little,
Well, I think it's
I'm just-
clearly, it's
Pickup
signs
tends to be a
that,
little less.
so you have multiple, but you have two,
Everybody's lined up going at
you
the same time.
have 2 lanes flowing this way, that way at the number 6 and a pull-off lane.
Okay.
And then on
Right.
the other, it's one way going along 8
Right,
and room for a parked car.
Okay.
So you have both.
okay.
Yeah,
How
so
does-
the
how does
intent
that-
is to keep people moving.
How does that part exist when there's an old building there?
Oh, that's very temporary, but, so the building's coming down quickly, but yeah, that's gonna be part of our challenge. This is the final plan? Sequentially, how,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine this will be kind of a temporary parking lot with
Yeah.
a modified version of that.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's a
Yeah.
temporary
That was
problem,
great.
but, okay,
yeah.
okay.
and
That's
then
why we're getting a CM. They'll answer that.
Good question, Josh.
the little like white path that goes to, is that Blockland?
Yes.
So I know we've talked about that a lot. Is that, we want that to be okay for bikers and walkers, but I think the complaint was about everybody that parks on Blockland and makes their kids go over there, right?
Right.
Do we have a plan for what that looks like, or do we just hope that we'll have LPD kind of?
That would be, and it wouldn't be LPD, it would be the town traffic committee that would decide whether to close off a street or put signs there, right?
No, it was the select board that would
Right.
ultimately decide. Yeah.
I just know that that's been something that people are talking about, so I think everybody wants them to walk and bike. I think they worry about how many cars just idle on that street the entire time waiting for their kids.
But I think important part of that path though is that's an important path for kids coming from the high school to use the middle school.
Yeah, for sure.
And vice versa.
I think that'll be an education thing, I think, down the road.
For parents and stuff.
Yeah, and also, if it becomes known that you can pull into Williams, do this big loop, get out of there pretty quick, then maybe that generation of parents won't be as concerned about going down Woodside or parking down there. Maybe they'll know it's quick, it's not a big deal, there's plenty of place to queue if you need to. So I think that's what I envision at least.
We don't want it to become the parking lot over there and then Diane's not happy.
Right. I mean, the loop that we have here is probably longer than the loop at the high school, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, right now, we have.
There's no way you can do 120 cars in the high
Right.
school, right?
And I guess, at center school, you're on a main road, and we barely have a drop-off lane. At Wolf Swamp, there's no real adequate drop-off lane. The high school has far more students and a shorter drop-off lane. So I think we're going to be well-positioned, and I think it does give us the flexibility that we're going to need. And no doubt there'll be some adjustments and some learning that happens early on that, we still make adjustments to live lines and pick up and drop off at all of our schools based on changing conditions. So-
David, do you have a question or a comment or something?
I do, it's not traffic related, so if the traffic conversation wants to continue, I can hold my question.
No, I just saw your hand. Sorry if I missed it earlier.
No, so, going back to the financials and the impacts for residents, my question is whether or not we have already, or if we're developing costs to compare our operating costs now, so utility costs, basic maintenance costs on an annual basis, compared to what they will be or should be after we consolidate these 2 schools and we have a much more efficient school to raise that point to offset the financial impact, we also have a financial benefit, or we should have a financial benefit?
I would say it's something that's in development. I don't think we have a firm grasp on it yet, but it's something that we're certainly aware of and should show, once the project is complete, that there are significant cost savings in terms of both maintenance and utilities.
Yeah, so that's something we're developing within this team, not just on the town side.
We have the
Developing an
data.
assessment of our current utility costs and the efficiency of systems compared to our future state.
We have the data for costs to operate both schools right now. In terms of
Right.
efficiency of what's in place, I don't know. Nick might have that, but, and we could side by side compare it for what you
Yeah,
have
so
already.
we've kind of been pulling that data, so Tom and I were just talking about that, and the district is providing, 3 years of running, operating utility costs. So we can certainly help on that, because that's what the energy model is helping to project, so we have that comparison. I think you're thinking about other forms of maintenance that are a little hard for us to put our heads around, so I think that's where the district and the town would want to look at other costs that they anticipate associated with, as we talked earlier about, site maintenance.
Yeah.
And the consolidation to one site, how that improves, expenditures and management. Those are issues that you would have the information on.
Yeah, and I would also want to make sure we were showing the true cost of what it will be to operate the system, because I don't want anyone going into this thinking it's going to be a massive cost savings overall, because these systems are generally more expensive, like staff-wise, and building management systems, which I don't know that we have in the two older schools right now.
To a degree.
Yeah. So there will be some increase in cost, but overall energy efficiency is going to greatly improve. So it's, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of it too, maybe I'm throwing too much into it, but I wouldn't want people to go into this thinking it's overall a huge savings.
Generally, when a newer piece of equipment breaks, it's more expensive to put it back together than an older piece of equipment breaks, unless it's under warranty, of course.
What you typically see is that these two buildings are at the end of their useful life, so there's a lot of basic wear and tear that's such that you have a lot of care and maintenance that you're always having to do. So that kind of goes away, but you have more sophisticated systems and greater capability than you have in the older schools. So you have IT that you don't have, you have cooling, so there's associated maintenance with these new systems that are providing healthier building, more teachable environments. So it's definitely not an apple-to-apple comparison, and that's, I think, part of what you're trying to point out.
Any further questions on that slide? Okay.
So these are slides.
So was that a yes?
Your point, I assume, your point, I assume, is that you think that this is information that needs to be part of presentation to the community as the community's wrapping their heads around
It's
this.
assessed, we need to make our due diligence, is my comment.
Yeah.
I mean, I will point,
It's a question that we got during the session
Right.
the other day. It's a question that we should be able to answer ourselves.
I think we also, when
We're going to invest the time to make the assessment.
right, and there's also a reminder, for us, it's easy to forget all the conversation we had about the obsolescence of the existing buildings and their systems, and the lack of certain systems in place, like fire protection, a lot of things like that, they're way back there, but for a lot of residents, that's information they may not have. We have to remember, there's also the cost of having done, if you did nothing, what would that cost be? So that's another piece of the puzzle, together with these questions about what's ongoing costs going forward. So, and we have that information, we just have to present it well, I think, as part of your point, is to be sure that that doesn't get forgotten.
yeah, and I'm glad you brought us back to that, because at some point, as you get into systems and OpEx on new systems and whatever else is going on, you don't lose sight, but it's like you said, it gets further in the background of, number one for Glenbrook is safety. Like, right, there's no way to control the envelope of the building from bad influencers. There's like one door. Like, now we're talking about upgrading with the safety and security and, you know, the atrium, being able to see the person there and see outside and the windows. So safety and updating, you know, like you said, fire systems, all that, just that can't get lost in this, as well as, you know, things that we need. You know, I can just rely back on from an OpEx perspective, like on the high school, we saved a lot more money, like, I'm gonna say rate-wise on electricity, but when we went to the high school, we added things we didn't have at the old building, right? We added a ton of computers, we added a ton of electronics, we added, you know, Elmos, and I mean, I'm probably dating myself now saying Elmo, but I don't know if they still use them or not, but, you know, all the other things, owls, and drain a lot of power, right? So your cost to produce that or to use it might be less, you're just using more of it, so it's not like some kind of panacea of cost savings that's going to happen just because you go efficient. That makes sense? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to give people false hope.
I just don't want to keep saying that, you know, it may not look good as maybe a reason why we don't do it. So I've heard it said a couple different ways that there will be more energy consumption. That's understood. But yeah, I think, and I would like to see the comparison of operating costs now versus day one.
Right, and so I actually was just looking at that again, so on the energy and operating costs, just in terms of operating the building, electricity and the comparison to the gas electricity now, it is a net improvement. And I wouldn't have said that on projects in the past, but part of what's changed is the stretch code's changed. So it's a much higher bar, and the energy modeling went into much greater depth of detail so that we feel confident in that information. Whereas in the past, I'd say you were in a different position with the high school.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's changed is there's a lot more stringency in the code around how energy is used, how electricity is used. A lot more requirement for management of timing on systems, occupancy controls, even the outlets are actually controlled in a way that they weren't, which kind of creates some headaches, to be honest, but it's all to the purpose of being sure that you actually are achieving a more efficient and less costly building. So it is an improvement. It's not like millions of dollars of difference here, you know, but on an annual basis, it looks like, $10,000 to $20,000 difference between the two, which adds up over time.
And two schools with adequate cooling systems now that don't exist, right? Like,
Right.
I hear you, David. I really do. I just don't think it's apples to apples in the OpEx experience. But I mean,
And that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
That's okay.
put the
That's
data
not-
out there, yeah.
good.
Yeah. Great. Well, I was just showing these as a summary of what was presented on the 10th, just in case folks weren't there, but then also, to me, this is kind of like the meat of really what's in that schematic design binder, right, is all of the background thought that's gone into what's seen here. So, new perspectives from the front of the school. And yeah, Marty, you can keep kind of just flying through this.
I mean, I will say that table that had that picture, people were really digging it.
That's great. That's great. We got lots of good feedback on the materials. We had some touch and feel,
Yeah.
see the brick, and
We had
like that
offers
went
of
well.
people to help come pick out curtains, so.
Yeah, a helpful diagram just to help folks orient themselves to the buildings in a little bit more detail on some of the classroom plans. And the floor plans that you are all very familiar with. We were able to do some interior perspectives, which were fun, just very early stages starting to develop. Gym, auditorium, cafeteria, and the commons in one of the classroom wings. This was at the table with the materials too. Exterior elevations, which are a little hard to kind of grasp, but that's what all of these will show up in the construction documents, but they'll just get uglier. So there'll be lots of notes and it'll be black and white, but, and then the geothermal table is also a popular spot.
Popular, yeah.
I want to go back to last week, and thank you for what you guys did last week. You know, working with us to organize that. I could not have thought of a better way to put the ideas forward without getting lost in people and sitting in rows, just expressing their opinions as opposed to being able to engage in healthy dialogue with the public. And so I would like to thank all of you, JWA and Colliers and all, everybody else involved for participating and helping, because I think it advanced. Even people who may not be of the same opinion on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, I thought were very respectful, with the exception of one interaction that I'm aware of. And just kudos to everybody for doing that.
I'll tell you, you find in this work that people come in assuming that they will never be heard, and by that meeting, I felt like people did genuinely feel like we were responding, and maybe not everyone gets everything they want in that conversation, but they definitely seemed much warmer to it and interested. And for our team, we brought a lot of our team down, and that was partly because you see a lot of us, but you're not aware of how many people are actually working in the background. And for them, it was wonderful also to have that interaction with members of the community, to really understand generally the significance of this. Obviously, so every decision we make, we want people to know that it's your community and your school.
And I think that conversation took a turn at points in that night from, I don't agree with you, or we may not have agreed in the beginning, but now how do we work together to make it the best school that we can? I was very, very pleased with some of the interactions I had with people who early on were, very vocal about it, and now like, okay, well, how do we make this design look better? Or how do we choose this color? Or explain to me how the traffic works. And I just thought 99.9% of the people there were very receptive to that.
Yeah. You guys put together really great materials too. It was really helpful to
That
see.
tribal?
Yeah, all of the pictures, all the images, the materials were really popular for people to be able to come over and actually feel the different possible options, look at colors. It was really helpful. So thank you for your whole team for putting that together.
All right, any further questions on the submission? Okay, so the next part of our agenda is the vote and approval of the submission. So the submission is due to MSBA on May 1st, or by
Well, part
May.
of it is actually going to be due next week. So
Oh,
they've
okay.
asked for some advanced materials, so
Okay.
we're already.
Do you need a vote on the advanced materials?
No,
No, okay.
It would just be the full.
it's just helping them.
So, I'll start this off just so we can start discussion as a board here. So it says vote and approval. We have a meeting on the 29th that was our original to vote. So I'm just putting it out there. I think there's 3 ways we can go. If there are no further questions and people wanted to vote tonight, we do have motions that are available to act on. 2, give a week and schedule a meeting for next week, maybe Thursday-ish. Maybe we can do hybrid, so it can be remote, and take that vote then, which gives us the week to respond to the week reduction from the MSBA towards the June meeting that they are talking about, or we just keep the 29th and vote on the 29th. So I'll open the floor for thoughts or discussion.
What would be the benefit to next Thursday instead of Tuesday the 29th? Does that, because they've moved their meeting forward from the 25th to the 17th, is that why we would need to potentially move ours forward from the 29th to, what is that, the 24th?
My opening wasn't geared towards that we had to, it was
Okay.
just more.
I get it. I was just
If
curious.
they
about that.
reduce their schedule, is there a reason to wait 2 weeks to vote on?
Yeah.
Yeah, the submission date isn't changing, it's still
Okay.
May 1st.
Okay.
It's just the MSBA, the board meeting, which is
Yeah.
in June, they're moving it
That moved
forward.
from
a week.
25th. Yeah.
Um, But the submission is May 1st.
Okay.
Whether we vote tonight or we vote another night.
Okay.
And I'm happy to keep it the 29th. I'm just giving people options as to, and seeing if we. Yeah.
I'm,
Sorry, I mean, are we saying, indicating the possibility of a vote tonight? And I guess with that in mind, is there any further discussion that we're expecting to have between now and the 29th that would support a different outcome?
I'll give my personal thought. For me, I don't think anything changes between now and the 29th. I'm ready to vote. I'm ready to submit. We've been working very collaboratively on this. I just didn't want to not give people the option of being able to say, will a week give me time to look even more into this and maybe come back with a question before the vote, because Dory and everybody would be here for that if there was any further questions. But for the public to understand, one, we had the forum last week, which talked about most of the stuff we were talking about tonight. Two, we've had the cost estimating back and forth. The PSR versus where we are tonight really hasn't changed from what we told the public initially. From all of those things, and then everybody on this board, just so the public knows, has had the package since the weekend to review and be prepared for tonight. So my expectation that everybody came tonight was prepared for this meeting. So me personally, Josh, I would be fine with taking a vote tonight myself personally. I just don't want to do anything unilaterally. I want to make sure.
I had a question very similar to Dave, yeah. It is, from our perspective, we've been sitting with this stuff for years now, and the initial estimates were pretty close, and when I looked at this, I said, oh, this all makes a lot of sense. Came in, there's no surprises, so I'm ready to go tonight.
Can I make a motion? And then we'll continue
Make your
discussing?
motion, because then we can discuss.
We
That's
can
fine.
discuss, okay.
I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the schematic design package and authorize Colliers Project Leaders as owner's project manager to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority on behalf of the district.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and second. Open for discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Is a roll call? Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Armin, yes. I would entertain any other motions?
Yep, I move to approve the total project budget, Form 3011, for the Long Meadow Middle School project as presented, to be included in the schematic design submission.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I would call for a vote. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Armin, yes. Motion passes. And then there's probably something for you to sign, right? Or no?
No.
Is there anything for Lynn to sign? Or no?
There was a signature line at the bottom of the 3011 for the superintendent and town manager. I don't know if that,
Yeah, we don't necessarily need that right.
Okay.
We'll make sure you get a copy before the submission, we'll get signatures.
Okay, moving on to next point of business tonight is the consideration of recommendations for special town meeting and election for middle school building project funding. Lynn or Josh, who's handling this? Or
I am.
okay.
So looked at a bunch of dates and also heard from Adam just about what the preference would be. Also compared it to some other things that are going on, including holidays, school professional development days, and a fall town meeting date. And it looked to be the best schedule was a special town meeting on September 9th and a ballot vote election on September 30th. It gives enough time in between for a potential referendum or recall of whatever happens at town meet. If something were to happen at town meeting that someone did want to petition to recall, that gives 5 days for that, and time for ballots to be printed for an election. So that was what I was suggesting. We can definitely talk about other options. I'm happy to go through other options that I considered and got feedback from the school, from Marty and Diane, but also from our town moderator to make sure that she didn't have a conflict, because that would not help. But ultimately, we ended on September 9th and September 30th. And if this group ends up deciding that they support that, I would ask that we take a vote, make a recommendation to the select board. The select board meets on May 5th, and I would be bringing this to them to discuss and hopefully set those dates so that we could start making sure that the public's aware.
I make a motion that the school building committee recommend to the select board a special town meeting on Tuesday, September 9th, and a town election on Tuesday, September 30th, for the purpose of approving the project scope and budget and the debt exclusion associated with it.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, I'll open for discussion.
Well, I got a question. So if we set the warrant for the election, set the ballot, I mean, is there, and it fails for, God forbid, at the town meeting, is there still time to not have the election, or have we already, will we have to have ordered our ballots and gotten everything in place by then?
We could wait and order ballots after town meeting. There would be time for that. My understanding is the votes, while they tie the project together, they're not tied together. Meaning, we could have done the election first and then the town meeting vote. So what I'm not clear on is if one fails, what does that do to the second one? So I can get clarity on that.
It's really just a logistics question, because I think I definitely agree that this is the order to do it. I know you and I talked about it a while back. I think having the town meeting before the election is definitely, strategically, I think it makes more sense. I don't want us to have an election for an override when there's nothing to bond. We wouldn't go forward with it, but it'd be a waste of money, even
Right.
just getting ready to go.
Right. I'll find out what the mechanism is to cancel an election.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully we don't have to worry about it,
Yeah.
but
But it's good to know what it
Yeah.
is. Yep.
So, my only question would be, I guess, Josh or Lynn. I feel funny making a recommendation to you on the select board, like, this
Well,
is
we
what
can-
we would like to do, but you guys can disregard it. Like, I don't want it to sound like it's a edict from the school building committee, and we are looking to work with you to find what the best dates are.
we get recommendations all the time.
Okay.
Take them or we don't. I mean, yeah, but I know.
As
that-
opposed to, is there, just know that I think the committee, I think the pulse of the committee is, if these dates don't work for the select board, we're open to working with the select board to whatever those dates are.
Oh, yeah. The select board will do what it wants anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about it.
And my only other concern about these dates, and this is the only concern I have at all, I think it's, great that we're moving forward. Given the summer and going into September 9th, does that give us enough time to mount an effective campaign between the June 18th meeting and the September 9th vote?
Can I-
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I'm not going to answer that one,
Yeah.
but I want to put Adam on the spot for a second.
Yeah.
Can you explain why the September dates were preferable and what it means for our project overall?
Yeah, so the way we were planning that is with the CM at risk, you can have early packages, which means that you can start, some site work early, maybe some early foundations, especially with the geothermal, maybe you can get in there. So you can start those, and correct me if I'm wrong, but right around, 90% documents, we can get in there and start some of this work. So if we're able to get in there the summer before school starts, and you can set up maybe some temporary roadways for construction entrances, you can set up your construction fence, you can do kind of all that stuff, so when school actually starts, this is all in place, versus starting school and then having a contractor come in right behind you, and then trying to do all this while school is in session, understanding that construction is going to be happening the entire time anyways, but this gives us a little bit of a head start to get in there and set up our roadways and separations between construction and students, parents, kids, everybody.
So that
That's-
September date gets us in the summer of '26?
In terms of
Yes.
starting potential
Site
site
work,
work.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Of some kind. I will say that Adam always gives an answer that has to do with construction, but I would give you a different answer, which is that once the project is approved, the design team can start on their scope of design work. And the more advanced the documents are,
Right.
when you get to that point of any construction, the better. So if it means a couple months of difference in time for us and the work what we're doing with the district and actually detailing the design, that makes a significant difference as well. Subtle, but it matters.
Which factors into our planned hope for opening in
Yeah.
fall of 2028 instead of having to worry about
Right,
being pushed back into mid-school year.
yeah.
I think on your other question, there's certainly something to be said for that it's harder to organize over the summer, it's harder to get the word out, get people in a room, but, there's still other ways to get out, but also everyone's just getting back into town, and school's just starting. You're going to have a lot of parents who have maybe never even been in the middle school walk in and say, oh, maybe we should get a new one of these. So people, it's a good time to engage people too. They're also, looking out for emails from Marty and things like that. So I see what you're saying, but
I see the opposite, like you're saying too. Like,
Yeah.
I know last week of August, my wife is totally engaged in what's coming up in the next week for school, and that school mom turns back on right away, and so engaged.
Yeah.
I would say that the June, even though the MSBA board meeting is an important milestone, I would not say that you need to hesitate to communicate with the community about this before that. I mean, you'll know the final numbers, that'll be resolved before that board meeting. So it's definitely important to do a push before the end of the school year to get information out, so
Yeah.
people.
I think that was part of the reason we did the April
Yeah.
engagement event, really, is because we just, looking ahead to a potential vote in September of '25. So we will have to continue that work through the end of this school year and into the summer. I mean,
Yeah. And also increase our online presence over the summer as well, so that folks can continue to be
Yeah.
informed wherever they might be.
All right, any other discussion on the recommendation amendment motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Armin, yes. Okay, next steps, meetings, so we're not going to need the meeting on the 29th, so we'll take that off the calendar. Is there anything else from a next steps, Colliers or JWA or?
I don't think so.
We'll be in touch with the district as we wrap up
Yeah,
our
we're
docs.
preparing to put the package together. and everything, yeah.
We've got the meeting coming up on, the next meeting scheduled for our normal meeting in May.
Yep.
And so we'll meet just to discuss what the agenda might look like.
Right. Yeah,
What would
we'll
you
have the
expect,
submission by then.
we would have feedback on the submission or anything else?
We may not have feedback from the MSBA, but, we can give an update, if there was any preliminary comments by then, we
Okay.
can certainly provide those. But then we can discuss what the schedule will look like from that point on.
Okay, good. All right, then I would entertain the ultimate motion.
Move adjourned.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. Lynn?
Yes.
Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Armin, yes. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. This is great.
Thank you all.
Everybody.
Thank you.